Hey,
Hey,
hello.
hello. Hey everyone. Hey, welcome.
Welcome, Daniel. We were just talking in the backstage and now suddenly we are live. What a feeling.
Yeah, yeah, what a feeling. Yeah, I hope everyone had a great weekend, and I had a great first week of the hackathon. And if you have any questions or anything, hopefully this first workshop here will answer some of those questions.
Yeah. We thought organizing this workshop just for if you are new to Storyblok, if you're new to the platform, new to the API, new to the open source ecosystem that we have, maybe this workshop will help you introducing you to the product that you can build with Storyblok and how you can like leverage some of our features. And so we decided to organize this, and we also hope we can answer some of your questions. So if you're watching this live on YouTube, there's the chat, and we are looking at the chat. So if you have questions while we are speaking here during this workshop, you can ask questions in the chat, and maybe we can live answer to your questions. But if you think you have some more complex question, or you think maybe the answer can help others, please join our Discord server and ask questions there, because then me, Daniel, the other mentors can help you and answer all your questions.
Mhm. Yep.
I think I said everything, and maybe we let time pass just to allow everyone to enter the live. I hope this is working because I'm not looking at the streaming session on YouTube. I'm just looking at what you also can see, Daniel, here in the backstage. So I
Yeah,
hope everything is working. We are not responsible if something is broken.
yeah. I don't want to watch myself on YouTube while we're just streaming. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
exactly.
Very awkward. And there's
Okay.
probably some lag and stuff too, but whatever.
So I think we can start,
Yeah.
and that you maybe can start by just showing something about Storyblok high level, just to
Yeah.
introduce some of the basic concepts.
Sure. Yeah. Well, first, really quick, let's just introduce ourselves. So I'm Daniel Mendoza, right? I am a senior developer relationship engineer at Storyblok in the US.
Yeah, you are correct. We need to introduce ourselves because maybe people don't know us. You are correct. So I'm Eduardo, and I'm also a senior dev at Storyblok, but I'm streaming from Italy. So I'm in the Europe, in the EU.
Yeah, awesome. Oh, and yeah, I just said US, but I am in Chicago. So any fellow Chicagoans, welcome. Um, okay, so I'll go straight into it. Let me go ahead and start talking about what Storyblok actually is. So I'm going to give you a brief overview on Storyblok. Okay, so, oh, is my screen inverted?
No, it's nice.
Oh, for some reason it was showing inverted for me. Sorry about that. One second. Let's reshare.
No,
Okay.
no, it's nice.
All right. Nice. Okay. So, right, this is our first workshop, like Edo said. So I will be going over what Storyblok actually is and just giving you a brief introduction into what we offer. Okay. So some of you are new to Storyblok, right? So what exactly even is Storyblok? Um, well, Storyblok is a headless CMS, right? So just this means that it's a headless content management system, right? Just meaning that it's decoupled or separated, right, from your actual front end layer. So your content layer or your backend is decoupled from your front end layer. And so, what does this mean? What are some benefits that we get from this? Well, some of these benefits are right since we are decoupled, we get to control that front end layer completely. We get to choose the tech stack, we get to choose the architecture and the patterns that we want to introduce here, right? And we then provide APIs, right, that you can then connect to actually consume that content and serve it to your end user within your front end layer, however you choose to, right? So one of the benefits that we get here, having this decoupled content layer from our front end layer, is something called right omni-channel delivery. And from there, this means that you can have a Next.js website or Next.js application for your website. You can have a React Native application for your mobile app. and you can even have, right, some VR application and so on and so forth. And you completely choose, you get to choose how you want to actually serve that content to your end user while using the same content that's created within Storyblok, right? You don't have to recreate that content. You have that one source of truth, and you serve it to the end user as you please. Okay, so one of the main things that comes from, or the main idea that comes into play with headless CMS is composable content, right? So what does that mean? Some of you are familiar with composable, right? That word, because it's a standard that we follow in web development, right? Composable architecture. We try to chunk parts of our application to be reusable across the board, right? And this is components. So when we're actually creating a project, we try to separate actual features into components that we can then reuse everywhere. And that idea then translates into our actual CMS with composable content, right? It's very similar. We have a very modular approach to actually creating these pages, right? We defined components that we can then use to build pages. So your authors, your marketers can go in and reuse these components across the board. And then another nicety here is that now the developers and the marketers or content authors have some sort of understanding, right? They have the understanding of what a component is, that a component makes up a page, and how that kind of works, right? They have the concept of modularity. Okay, another thing that we offer within Storyblok, so an awesome thing that we offer is the visual editor. And so what this is it just allows the actual content authors and marketers the ability to have a visual representation of their changes before they actually publish them to be available to the end user, right? So they'll actually see the web application loaded within the Storyblok web app, and they can select different components. They can drag and drop components, and then they can make edits here. They can add new content and so on and so forth. And they'll actually see those changes in real time, showing them what the actual at the end content is going to look like before they make that published to the end user. And we are API first, so we have an API first approach. And with that, right, we have multiple APIs. So we have a content delivery API, which is the read-only API. This is what you're going to be using to actually serve your content to the end user, right? You're going to actually be consuming your content from Storyblok with the content delivery API and then giving that to the end user. And then we have our content management API, which is read and write. And what you can do with the content management API is you can automate a lot of the things that you want to do across different environments, right? For example, deployments across different environments, right? You can actually run all of your logic that you need to run within the CMS as well, and automate that throughout your pipelines. And then we also have a GraphQL API, which is also read-only. And we also provide multiple tooling for everyone, right? So we have a Storyblok CLI. So what this is, right, it's a command line interface. It's built on top of the management API. So you get to run complex operations within your command line that you would normally just run within the using the management API, right? You can export and import components, you can run migrations, and so on and so forth. We'll get more into that. And then we also have dedicated SDKs. So we do have a JS and PHP client, right? So you can use those for any JS or PHP application that you would like. But we do also have dedicated SDKs for dedicated frameworks, right? So we have React, Vue, Nuxt, Svelte, and Astro SDKs, which just speeds up the process and gives an opinionated and way to actually integrate Storyblok to one of your applications, right? And then these also have dedicated guides and tutorials for you to follow to actually get set up fairly quickly. And that was just a very quick introduction, high-level introduction into Storyblok. So now I'm going to pass it over to Edo so he can start going into the technical, and we will go over that together. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Daniel. I will now show my presentation, which is this one. Okay, and we will gonna try to go deep into the technical features that you can use from Storyblok. We will start from what Daniel said. So you got, oh yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to post them. Absolutely. And we will start from what Daniel said. So now you have a general overview of the product. Now you know what Storyblok is. Now you know why people should choose Storyblok for their product. And now we're gonna try to better understand how you can use Storyblok from a developer's perspective. So what API, how you can use our API, how you can use our open source libraries and tools. And also, Daniel, please feel free to interrupt me anytime and add something, or yeah, or correct me if I say I'm saying something wrong.
Of course, yeah.
Okay, so we will cover some fundamentals. We will start from seeing what are or what do we intend when we talk about stories, when we talk about blocks, the visual editor, what APIs are we offering? So as Dana said, the content delivery API and the management API, and some of the DX tools that we are offering, how to use them, how to use the tokens, how to use the endpoints. And then we see some examples, some example reference implementation in JavaScript. So you will understand the core concepts of Storyblok. We will navigate the content delivery API together with some examples. We will try to implement some basic content fetching, even using JavaScript. We will also see some PHP examples, and we will use the JavaScript client library. Okay, I think we can skip the agenda and go straight to the Storyblok fundamentals. So first of all, what is a story? So in Storyblok, we are calling stories the content entries. So every page, you may think of of them like pages in the monolithic CMS. So in the traditional CMS, you will call them pages, but in Storyblok, we call them stories. So there are content entries, and each story is defined by a schema and, of course, a story type. So, for example, you have a page, you have an article. If you're developing a blog, you will have an article, and it's fundamentally defined by its schema. And each story is unique. So each story has a unique ID, and you will reference them with that with that ID and also UID. Another thing that is unique to a story is the slug. So the slug, like for example here, the about us or a slug for your blog post, this is also unique. Then for each story, you have the content structure. So you will have the component details and every field data and details, plus some more fields like metadata, like everything you may find in one story, who created it, the last published date, when the story was created, and also some other multilingual fields that maybe you won't use them in this hackathon, but just to let you know that when you fetch a story, so when you just call an endpoint and get a story from Storyblok, you will see something similar to this JSON response. So you will find this story object and then some properties. So properties that are unique to the story and properties that are its schema. Okay. Then the block. And the block are reusable components. Now, if you remember Daniel's presentation, you will remember that in a page, in a single story, you were seeing different components in the page, and we call them block. So when you define a block, you can then reuse it through your stories. You can even nest blocks, so you can have blocks as children of other blocks. And in Storyblok, we have three types of blocks. We have content type blocks, and content type blocks are the blueprints for stories. So you can have a content type block that is an article, a page, a post. So these are the blueprints of a story. Then we have nestable blocks that you can just nest, that don't have a life cycle of their own, so they don't have an ID. They are blocks that you can just reuse and nest, like a text block, an image block, a hero. And then we have universal blocks, and they are both content types and nestable. So we have forms, we have CTAs, authors. For example, the author of a blog post can be both nested into the blog article and also live on its own with their own page. And this is an example of the response that you see in the API for a block. In this case, this is the hero section, for example, and with some fields like a background image and CTA button. This is just an example, just to let you know that when you fetch a story, again, in its content, you will find some blocks. And this, for example, is a block that you can find in a story.
Yeah, a good way to think of it is like the content type blocks are the pages, or that the page level and the nestable blocks will be the components that actually live in those pages. And then universal block is both, right? So like great example that Edo gave was authors. You would most likely have an author page and then also want to reference an author or put an author component within a page itself. So
yeah, exactly. And then we have field types. When you create a block, you will add fields to the block because you want your editors to interact with the blocks by putting content into your block. And we have basic fields that we provide, basic and advanced fields. So we have fields that we provide out of the block. Sorry for the repetition, but we have some fields that you can already find in our visual editor when you are creating a block in our editor. And basic fields, as you may expect, are like text area, markdown, number, boolean, date, time. So these are the basic field types. I call them basics because you will find like a basic structure representation for them in the JSON. So for example, a boolean field will just be true or false. A number will just be your number. A text field will just be its value. So with basic field types, you will just see a key value representation in the JSON. But there are more advanced field types, and the value of this field, of this advanced field, is not just a single value like a primitive, like a string or a number, but they are more complex. For example, a rich text field can be more complex because a rich text field may have a complex structure in it, may have also nested blocks in it. So it will be more complicated than a single value. Also, we have other examples, like we have assets. Like for example, we have images. Like in images, you don't have like a single value, but you will have multiple properties to the image. Like you have the URL, you have some metadata. So you have many properties to a single field. Also, you can have relations. You can have relations to other stories, for example. So as you may expect, in a block, you will find some fields, and fields are what you defined as schema for the block. You may even define your own. Fields. So in Storyblok, we provide an SDK which is called the Field Plugin. With the Field Plugin SDK, you can define your own field types. So you will need to become a bit of an advanced Storyblok user because you will need to code your own field. But there is this possibility. So if basic or advanced fields are not enough for your project, for what you are building for this hackathon, keep in mind that you can code your own custom field. And we have documentation for it. So you just search for custom fields or field plugin in Storyblok, and you will find documentation and tutorials on how to create your own field types. Okay? Now, as Daniel mentioned, we have the visual editor. So your editors or editors of a website will use it to just input content. If you are developing an app and you want to integrate the app with the visual editor, you will need to connect it via a JavaScript script. And this script is the bridge. We call it bridge because it's actually a bridge between what's happening in the visual editor and your front end. So you will find tutorials and documentation about it, but very quickly, you just need to add this JavaScript script, this file to your front end, and react on events. So when something happens, you can react, and you will find plenty of documentation on how to do it. This is only if you want to create something for this hackathon that interacts with the visual editor. So probably not. Nowadays, I'm thinking of it, but if you need to, this is that, like, the basics on how to implement the visual editor and connect it with your app. Now, in Storyblok, we have a relations system. So in Storyblok, we basically are a content management system. So we are hosting content, and if you have an advanced content management system, you will also have relations between your pieces of content. And so we support relations between stories. Relations can be a single reference, so a link to a single story, or a multiple reference, so link to multiple stories. In the visual editor, so in the UI, this will be like an option, like a single option or a multi-option. And when you fetch the story, when you fetch a story from the content API, and the story has some relations with other stories, then you will find the relations as UUID, because you will find that stories are linked using other stories UUID. So if you fetch a story and that story has relations with other stories, you will also fetch the UID of these relations. And you will need to resolve the relations. There are many, you have a couple of possibilities actually to resolve relations. If you use the libraries that we provide, so if you use the JavaScript library, for example, we can resolve them for you. So you just pass some options to the client, we will see it. But we basically can resolve the relations for you. Resolving a relation means that means replacing the UID with the actual story content. So the JS client is able to replace and resolve this for you, or you will need to resolve it yourself, which means making another call, subsequent calls, to fetch all the relations that you need. So if you have a complex data architecture in which you have multiple stories with multiple relations, you know that you can and you need to resolve them. So you can resolve them using an automated approach via the JavaScript client, or you resolve them manually with other subsequent fetch calls. Okay? Then in Storyblok, we support internationalization. Probably for the purpose of this hackathon, you won't need to deal with internationalization. But just to let you know that we offer language support, so we offer various approaches. We offer, and the probably the most easy one is to have languages in different folders, because you can also organize content in folders. So you can have a folder for your English content, another for your Italian content. But you can also translate fields. So if you have one story, you can translate field by field. We support field level translation. So if you mark one field as translatable, then editors can switch languages and input content which is translated in different languages. And then when you fetch a story, you also provide the language in which you want the story, and you will receive fields translated, fields by field, translated in the language that you requested. Okay? Okay, I think we're ready to go. It's not really a deep dive, but we can go a bit deeper into the API.
We're deep diving into shallow water.
Exactly. So let's start from what do you need to fetch content from Storyblok. So first of all, of course, you need an account. So create an account in storyblok.com, create a space. The space is like the container of all your stories, of all your content. So you create a new space. Every content that you add will stay in this page, isolated from other spaces. And then, of course, you select your plan. There's a free tier. So maybe for this hackathon, you can go with the free tier. Then we have two different kinds of APIs. And Manuel mentioned it. We have the content delivery API, the management API. We also have the GraphQL API, but the GraphQL API is just for enterprise tiers. So now we will focus on just the content delivery API and the management API that you can use regardless of the tier that you're into. And the main difference is that you will use the content delivery API to present content. It's just a read-only API, so you will use it to grab your content from Storyblok and display it. The management API is what you will use if you want to create something that manages content. So if you're creating like a script or a dashboard or an app that allows others to interact with the content, not just the content, but also the schema. So everything that is in Storyblok, in your space, then you can use the management API. There are many endpoints that you can use. We will see some of them later to really interact with the content. Okay? Aliu, your question is about internationalization. It's not required. So you can it's not required that you add internationalization to your project. Just single language is good enough.
Yeah, but if you want to add it, you can feel free to. You're free to do whatever you would like to do with that. So if you do want to add it and you have questions, feel free to ask questions in our Discord, or just we have a lot of documentation surrounding localization as well.
Yes. Okay. So we have two APIs. Also, the way that you authenticate with the API is different, because with the content delivery API, you authenticate using access tokens that are read-only. So you will have you can create as many tokens as you want, but a token can be a public token or a preview token. The public token is the token that you can also expose to the public, because it's just for fetching public content. So public that you will publish in your website, in your front page or in your app. But the preview token, with the preview token, you can fetch and display draft content. So if you have a draft content, so content that you have that you didn't publish, then the preview token can also fetch this content. So you will keep this token secure, because you don't want to expose private or draft preview content. Okay, but these tokens are just strings that you will append to the API calls. While for the management API, you will need to use a personal access token. This is a secure token that is for individual user access. So this is for your own access, and you will generate it and find it in your user settings in Storyblok. So you will generate your personal access token, and use it for management API, and it is tied to your user. You can also use the OAuth token, but this is mostly for if you want to extend the Storyblok. So if you want to, for example, write a field plugin, so with a custom field, then you can use OAuth, or even if you want to write an app that extends Storyblok. But I guess that for this hackathon, probably you will use the management API and the personal access token. And we will see some example of it. It is just a token that you will include in your API request. So a couple of examples on how the content delivery API works. Key endpoints. You can get all stories, for example. And you see that I'm appending the token to the API request. So if I call this endpoint, I will fetch all the stories that are in my space using my token. I can also, of course, get a single story. So for example, I can append the slug parameter. So the slug is unique to the story. So I can use it to fetch the individual story. I can also use the story ID, for example. Anything that is unique to the story and supported by the API endpoint, I can use it. Slug, for example, is the most common example because in a web application, you will mostly use the slug to fetch an individual story. The endpoint also supports filters. So you can add query parameters to a stories endpoint and get stories filtered with specific parameters. For example, and I've added some of them, you can oh no, I added them later. But in this example, I started with blog. For example, I get all these stories that starts with blog, and I want 10 stories per page. So to better dive into some parameters, you can specify pagination, so how many numbers you want for per page. So maximum 100 parameters, 100 entries per page, and then the page number to retrieve, so 1, 2, 3, etc. When you fetch from this endpoint, so you will fetch multiple stories because we are fetching the stories endpoint, you will find this response, this structure. You will find the stories params, which is an array of stories. If you remember the story structure that I explained previously, this is a single story. And so in this array, you will find multiple of these stories, as many stories as you can fetch. And so with their ID, with their slug, with their name. Plus, you will have some additional parameters. For example, you will have the content version, the CV. CV is, sorry, the cache version, not the content version. The cache version is the latest timestamp in which you updated this story. So this maybe is useful if you updated a story many times and you need a specific version, or if you are caching your stories and you want to always get the cached version of the story. If this parameter is more recent, then you are getting the most recent version of a story. Okay. Other parameters may include rels, and this is the resolved relations, because you can, as I said, resolve some relations, and links, which is another kind of relations. Then I was mentioning some query parameters. Some useful query parameters for you can be filtering by folder. For example, if you place some stories into some folders, you may want to filter them by folders, and you can use the starts with parameter. For example, starts with blog, you will fetch all the stories which slug starts with blog. You can also filter by content type. In this case, for example, I'm filtering component, and I'm getting two types of content, the blog post and the article. I can also do a full text search. So in this case, I'm using the search term parameter, and I'm searching for the word JavaScript. I can also search using this parameter, which is filter query. In this case, I'm searching for the word JavaScript in the field title. So these are two kinds of search: a full text search that is searching in all fields of the story, and this search, which is searching in a specific field, which is the title. Okay? So for relations, you can tell the API to automatically resolve some relations. How to do that? Appending the resolve relations parameter to the API request. So if you append the resolve relations parameter, you can add a list of relations that you want to solve, and in the response, in the rels parameter, you will find the resolved stories. And otherwise, you will find the UID, and you will need to refetch the other stories. Same for links, and oops. Oh, okay. I cannot grab this, but I can do this. Okay, I can do this. Here, for example, there is a relation that is resolved by field type, because if in a post I have relations into a field called author bio, then I can resolve them using post.author bio. Maybe this is a more advanced example that you will not use, but just for your knowledge. In this example, more combined, I'm composing a full query to our API endpoint. So this is plain JavaScript. I'm not using the JavaScript, our JavaScript libraries. This is just plain JavaScript. So I'm just using the base URL for the content delivery API, which is v2cdn in api.storyblok. And of course, your access token can be your preview or your public token. And here I'm just creating a URL with some I'm just creating the search parameters for a URL. So I'm appending the token, I'm appending the starts with, per page, some of the filters that we saw. And then the final URL will be made of the base URL plus the endpoint I want to fetch plus my parameters. So this is an example on how to compose one request to our content delivery API. Okay? The management API, they are a bit more complex because they allow you to do something more. You not only can get the stories, and the structure of these responses will be exactly the same as the content delivery API. You are just fetching stories here, but you can also create new stories. So you can just change the verb. So here you are posting a new story. Here you are putting a story. So you are changing something into in the story, in the content entry. You can also delete a story. And you have other endpoints. For example, you can publish a story, but you can also upload assets. For all of these, I encourage you to go to our website and search for management API documentation, because there are examples on how to use these endpoints. If we have some time in the end, we will also do a quick tour of the Storyblok documentation, but you will find examples on how to use these endpoints. When you call one of these endpoints via using the management API, you need to add your authorization token, so your personal access token, to the HTTP call. And this is an authorization header. Okay, so you add your authorization, you add your personal access token, and then your call will be authorized. Of course, this must be a secret. This is very sensitive because people can mess with your content using the personal access token. So never include this in your repository. Never published it online.
Yeah. And then a quick note, you can see like get all stories up there. So you can get content from management API, right? But you should not, it's not interchangeable with the delivery API, right? You shouldn't be using this API to serve content to the end user, right? Because like Elo said, this is sensitive. Like you can expose that accidentally. And there's also different limits. There's the CDN layer works differently, right? This is a lot of different reasons you shouldn't use this, but they're not interchangeable, right? This should not be used to serve content to the end user.
Yes. This is mostly if you want to create an app that manages your content. Even if you're getting stories for managing them, because these stories are not cached. And of course, you're right, Daniel. Rate limits are different, so the pricing also can be impacted with the use of this management API. So when you want to just display content, use the content delivery API. If you want to act on your content, then use the management API. There are different purposes.
Yep.
JavaScript implementation. So we saw how the API we saw some different endpoints for the content delivery and the management API. And I mentioned that you can use the JavaScript client, which is a library that you can download and use to simplify how you interact with the API. This is just basically this is a wrapper on the API. So you are not forced to use this. You don't need to use this, but it's a way to help you because it abstracts you some of the complexity of the endpoints, and also it abstracts you some of the management you will need to add for managing the cache, for example, how the cache works, and other complications. So if you want to just, for example, fetch or manage your data, you will want to look into the Storyblok client. The Storyblok client, you can install it just calling install Storyblok.js client with your package manager, and you will find some abstractions, and you will find some types. So there are some type definitions. You can manage the cache and you can manage the throttling. And the Storyblok.js client supports both the content delivery API and the management API. This is an example on how to initialize the Storyblok.js client. You initialize it by calling new Storyblok client. When you initialize the client, you want to pass the access token, again, your preview public token, and by default, the cache is managed by the Storyblok.js client. What does it mean? Means that you don't need to deal with the content version, with the cache version, or anything like that, because the version is managed by the client itself. So you will just get the latest content. If you want to add or to plug in your own cache layer, you can. So in this case, I'm using the default memory cache implementation of our Storyblok client, but you can write your own and write your custom implementation. As long as you follow the interface of our cache in Storyblok client, you can write your own. And you can also specify the region. This is optional because the default would be EU, but you can specify the region when where your content resides. I'm looking at the chat because there's a question. Do you have advice on how to secure this personal access token? Yes, I have advices, and we will see them in a few slides. To integrate the visual editor very quickly, you add a bridge script. You initialize the script, the bridge using the Storyblok.js library, which is another library. I'm thinking I will just skip this slide because maybe you don't need to integrate the editor. What do you think, Daniel? Maybe you're just
they might need to, because one of the cases that we promote is getting visual editor to work for.
Okay. So the visual editor basically is an application, so a web app with an iframe inside. In the iframe, what you're looking at is your live app. You can specify the URL of your live app. It can be your local app or the app that you deployed on Vercel, for example. So when you're looking at a visual editor, inside you're seeing an iframe with your app running. So you need a way to exchange data between the editor itself, which is a web form, of course, and your live app. And this bridge, because the name is a bridge, is our bridge library, which is this Storyblok v2 latest. But basically, you can abstract this using the Storyblok.js library. So you install at storyblok/js, and you will also find documentation on how to add this. But basically, if you get the use Storyblok bridge from this library, you will use it this way, and you are abstracting some of the integration that you need to do to respond to events that are happening on the visual editor. Because when you input some content and you save, these are some events, and you have data coming from these events. You have data coming from these events, so you will grab some data and react to what's happening in order to change your content. So you will have new data. You want, for example, to reload the page or do something with your new data. So This slide is very, very minimal. I encourage you to go and search for the Storyblok Bridge visual editor integration. You will find all the tutorials, all the documentation in how to integrate this visual editor and your app. But basically what's happening, you are reacting to events. Events are defined by a global Storyblok object that are just fetching what you're typing into the form and passing them to your application. So there's is this bridge between your app and the visual editor. Okay. Now you can also, if you're writing PHP, so if you choose to not use JavaScript but PHP, we also have a content API client and also a management API client. So you can install them using Composer, and the usage is very, very similar to what you saw using the JS client, basically with PHP. Now, best practices and also for security. For live site, use version published. Sorry. Why for performance? Because the published version of a content is by default cached. So when you fetch a published content, you will actually hit our CloudFront cache. So the content will be served quickly to your app. If you're using the draft content is not cached. So you will bypass the cache, you will hit the backend, and so the request will be slower. So if you're going live for a live website or a live app, use version published. It's also for security reasons, of course, but again, also for performances, because you're hitting the cache. If you're not using the JS client, because the JS client is doing the caching by default for you, if you choose to not using the JS client, you will need to enable client-side caching and manage the content version parameter that I mentioned earlier. But I encourage you, if you're writing a JavaScript project, to use the JS client, which is handling the caching for you. Also for performance, when you have many relations, resolve only the relations that you really need for a call, because relations take time to resolve, of course. So if you want quick answers, resolve fewer relations. Do not resolve any relations, just the relations that you need, because relations take time to resolve. If you fetch thousands of stories, so if you use Storyblok as a content management system for storing many items, paginate the request. So paginate your data set. You can use per page and page parameters. Requests will be much faster and also be cached, and also will be cached easier. And then use the image optimization. In our API, we offer endpoints for optimizing images. So if you have an asset uploaded in Storyblok, a content, you can append some parameters to the asset endpoint. For example, here width and x height, or 400 x 300. These are just a couple of examples, but the image service of Storyblok offers you many options. You can choose the compression of the JPEG. You can blur the images. You can crop them, resize them. You can do many things, and this is also, of course, good for performances. So for security, the management API token should never ever be exposed. So use environment variables. Use environment variables in your local repository. And if you're using GitHub, for example, use secrets in GitHub. In general, use secrets in any code repository that you're using for Storyblok. but the management API never put it as plain text in your code. Refer to a secret, refer to an environment variable in an .env file, for example, that you never commit. Never copy paste that the API token as plain text in your code. You should never commit it. Okay, so if you're deploying locally, and .env file with the list of your secrets and your tokens. If you're using GitHub, secrets. So you add a new secret and use and use the secrets. Even if you're deploying to Vercel, for example, in Vercel you can use environment secrets, and again you use them and you put the management API token or the preview and public token as secret, but never in the code. Same for the preview token in the content delivery API. So the management API is very, very sensitive. Never do that. But you should also try to never expose your tokens. If you need to expose a token because you need to make some calls, and in your code you need the token, at least be sure it's the public token for fetching public content. Try to never expose the preview token. But again, you can use environment variables, you can use secrets, so you can use any technique that you want and refer to them as secrets and never just use plain text for them. Also, another good advice for security is to validate your API responses. So even if you are in control of your backend, this is also general advice. You should never trust your backend. Even if you perfectly know the documentation, if you are in control of your schema, always validate it. So you're fetching data, you validate that your data is exactly as you expect your data to be. This is also for the integrity of your content, but it's also for security. So just add a simple layer of validation on top of your content when you're fetching it. Also, be mindful that Storyblok API has rate limits. They are generous, but especially if you have a big content repository in Storyblok, be aware that we have API rate limits, and you will see them in your dashboard. So if you go to your Storyblok dashboard in your space, you will see the rate limits. You will see how many calls to the API you made and how many you have left. So be always aware of that. And lastly, try to plan your content structure. Try to think reusable, try to think modular. A good strategy would be to think of the domain of your app. So the principles of the domain-driven design are what probably can help you organizing your content model. You can organize your content in folders. So you can use, for example, /blog, /product. So organize all your content in folders. You can define schemas for your content. So you can also use some of our tools to get types out of your components, out of your blocks. So you can have schema for your components, and you can also use schema to validate your components. Then another big feature that we offer are webhooks. With webhooks, you can, for example, trigger a cache invalidation if you are using your own cache. You can invalidate your cache, or you can trigger a build. The most common scenario is you have a build in Vercel, you want to trigger a new build whenever an editor publishes a content, or you can have notifications. So use webhooks. We have them. You find them in your settings. That's it. You can find many more information in the Storyblok documentation. In the Storyblok documentation, you can find the documentation for every endpoint, but also for every SDK. So if you're building an app using React, using Next, for example, using Astro, you will find documentation on how to use these frameworks with Storyblok. We have SDKs for them, so you can use them and use the documentation. Make a visit to our GitHub. make sure you visit our GitHub page. So in our GitHub page, you will find all our libraries. And of course, join Discord and add all the questions that you have in our Discord channel. I don't remember the channel name, but I think it's forum mentor something.
Yeah,
It-
Mentors Forum, I think.
oh,
Mentors Forum.
perfect. Yeah,
Yeah.
mentorship forum. So you join Discord and you join the mentorship forum channel, and you can add your questions there, because there then also other mentors can answer and other participants can benefit from your question.
Yep. And we encourage you to take a look at the SDKs if you haven't started yet, because we did only go over like the JS client today, but the SDKs do handle a little bit more for you. They are a little more opinionated, but they might work for your use cases, especially for a hackathon, right? You're kind of just building something quickly, and you don't necessarily care too much about how the integration happens. You go ahead and take a look at some of our SDKs. And again, if you have any questions on what we went over today, or maybe things that you are struggling with, or things we didn't go over today, feel free to ask us questions in Discord. Just like Elo said, we're checking there daily. So we'll go ahead and answer your questions. We won't give you direct answers. We won't be like, hey, this is how you do this, or like we're not going to write your project for you, but we'll answer any questions that you have for us. But yeah.
Yeah, and just as a quick reference, in the homepage of the Storyblok documentation, you will see the content delivery API here and the management API here. And as we said, you find documentation and examples for every endpoint. So if you're working with the content delivery API, you will find how to retrieve multiple stories, as I said, all the parameters that you have, examples with the response. If you're using the management API, again, with stories, you will want to, create a new story. And you see the properties that you have, how an example of a call, so you can create a new story or edit a new story with the put, for example, publishing a new story, or with the put endpoint, updating a story with some other parameters. So again, this is an overview of everything that we offer. I think we have some time for questions if you have some in the chat, or we will see you on Discord.
Yep. Yeah, I don't think we have any questions coming through. But yeah, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Edo, for taking us through that deep dive on the technical part of the API.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. And as a last advice, go to our GitHub page and you will find the reference for all our SDKs or our tools. So for any of them, you can also find some documentation on how to install them and use them. Okay, I think that's it. Also, thank you, Daniel, and thank you, everyone. We'll see you on Discord. Happy hacking, because Sid forced me to say this line. So happy hacking, folks.
Yeah, if it's cringed, it was part of the job. We have to say it.
I have to say it, yeah. We are obliged by our contract.
It's in our contract, yeah. All right, thank you, Edo. Thanks everyone for joining. Remember, ask us questions in Discord. Have a good one.
Ciao.